The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Don't adjust your screen. There is nothing wrong. You're about to enter a world where the very concept of time is rendered obsolete by the sheer power of entertainment. You're about to enter the Boggis Hour. Of the Boggis Hour, Greg Boggis.
Welcome to this episode of the Boggis Hour. My guest is a 2007 Emmy Award winner. He's been on The Late Show with David Letterman, The Tonight Show with Jay Leno, and he writes for the Conan O'Brien Show. And he's also the author of a book, The Astounding Misadventures of Rory Collins. My guest tonight, Brian Kiley.
My wife's an amazing woman. She knows a lot about wine. Like, she knows which wine goes with which breakfast cereal. Very impressive. I call my wife Pumpkin because she always gets smashed around the holidays. When I first met my wife, I didn't think I had a shot with her at all because she was just so pregnant. Not normally my type. But I'm much more cynical than my wife. Like, I don't believe in ghosts or the G-spot or any of that nonsense. I haven't seen it. So. Hate to admit, sometimes my wife's past bothers me. She has a tattoo on her arm of her ex-boyfriend. And I'm used to it by now. She's had it since Christmas. But initially. My wife's always shocked when I actually know something. Like, the other night watching Jeopardy, and the question is, what's the tallest building in the world? And I said, oh, that's Burj Khalifa in Dubai. She's like, how do you know that? I said, well, when your parents were living with us, I Googled, what should I jump off of? And that's what came up. I found today that my wife's parents are coming to visit, and my wife hasn't mentioned anything yet. I can just tell from the way the animals in my neighborhood are behaving. Something's up. Married for more than 20 years, there's still this tension between her father and me. He's always given me a look like, you're having sex with my daughter. And I'm always giving him a look like, barely.
So here I am with Brian Kiley, Emmy Award winner, multiple Emmy nominee, and the head monologue writer for the Conan O'Brien Show. Thanks for coming on.
How are you, buddy?
Good, how are you?
Good to see you.
Well, yeah, thanks for coming on. So I'd like to just start in talking about, maybe where you came from and how you started to do stand-up comedy.
For sure.
So go ahead and let me know.
I grew up in Newton Center, Mass, and I just always loved comedy and jokes, and I loved the Dick Van Dyke Show. And as a kid, I wanted to be a comedian, but I thought, how do you do that? You don't get to be a comedian, So I thought, but I did know that TV shows had writers. So I thought, well, at least I could be a sitcom writer or a TV writer or something, So I used to write jokes, and I had little note cards, and I would write my jokes. I don't know what I was thinking I might need these someday. And, they've been lost to history, much like the library at Alexandria. But I can't imagine that they were any good, But I did that as a teenager, kind of compulsively. And I went to Boston College. And when I was in school, we had a comedy show with a couple of comedians, and the last comedian, Barry Crimmins, I thought was great. So I went and talked to him, and he was running the Ding Ho Comedy Club. I said, I want to be a comedy writer, whatever. And I met with him, and I brought my jokes and so on. And he let me come to the Ding Ho for free whenever I wanted, and I would go once a month. I would take like a subway and two subways and two buses or whatever. Inman Square was impossible to get to. But I would do that regularly. And then I took a summer school class at Emerson, taught by Dennis Leary.
Oh.
And they had us write comedy, but also do stand-up. And the last class invited guests, people in, and it went pretty well. And people said, well, you should pursue this or whatever. So I went and I signed up for the open mic at Ding Ho, and Crimmins was the host, coincidentally. So he gave me a good spot, and it went great. And then, I went back the next week to Lenny Clark's show and bombed miserably at 12:30 in the morning. But I just had been kind of doing it ever since. And then after college, I started doing it full time.
What year did you actually first get on stage?
Well, I graduated in '83, so either '82 or the end of '81. I hate to say, I guess, maybe '82 somewhere. Yeah.
So, what did you plan to be if the comedy thing didn't work out? Did you have a career that you were
a backup plan?
Yeah, plan B.
I guess when I was in college, I was trying to decide. I said, well, I'll either try to be a TV writer or a sports writer. I guess those were kind of my two options. But I'd written a lot of sports writing stuff in high school and so on. But I kind of shifted over when I was in college, and I was like, they would have me write like a humor column for the paper and things like that. And when I was starting to get gigs in college, so I was like, let me see where this leads, and I didn't really have a backup plan.
Well, it ended up working out pretty well for you.
It worked out okay, yeah.
So your style of stand-up comedy is pretty much a straight monologist. You're not a character guy. You're not a screamer or anything like that, or an impressionist. You're just a straight joke guy.
So here are these jokes.
And so, who were the joke guys that inspired you beyond just watching Dick Van Dyke?
Well, I would say Rodney Dangerfield was I was a big fan. I was a big fan of Woody Allen's comedy. I think Bob Newhart, even though we had different sort of styles, I feel like we had similar demeanors. And sort of similar characters, if you want to use that term, but it's not an extreme character. It's just sort of a version of my personality, I would say. Stephen Wright was a big influence, I think. And when I started, I would try to do some sort of Stephen Wright-ish jokes, and people were like, "What?" Like it didn't fit me. People didn't buy it at all. So it takes a while to figure out what works for you and what people buy coming from you.
And how long into doing stand-up did that take for you to come to that point where you kind of figured out who you were, what your character was, and what an audience would buy from you that you would sell to them?
Well, it took me a while. I also think performing was hard for me. I think the writing jokes came naturally for me, but I was terrified to be on stage. And, when I started, we do Lenny's open mic every Wednesday night. And Tuesday afternoon, and this is at the Ding. And Tuesday at noon, I would get a knot in my stomach for a day and a half beforehand. And I remember one time there was a Monday holiday. So I'm at school, and I got the knot in my stomach. And I thought, it's only Monday. And then I realized, no, it is Tuesday. It was a holiday yesterday. Like, my stomach knew when to get the knot, even when I didn't.
It was on the proper schedule.
Yes.
Wow.
Absolutely.
So, do you still have that?
That nervousness?
Yeah.
Not so much. Really, it's Every once in a while, there's a terrifying gig where you think, "Oh, I might bomb here," But generally, you kind of go, "Well, this should be fine." But I do think that little bit of nervousness helps you.
Sure.
Otherwise, you're just kind of flat.
So when did you start doing the transition from being a performer to then being a writer for other performers?
Well, it's funny. I had some good things happen for me. I'd got on the Tonight Show a couple of times and so on, but the comedy boom had ended. So even though I was finally starting to headline and I was getting on television, my income was going down. And and I'd gotten married. I look back now and think, where did I get the nerve to get married? At age 30, being a comic, my meager income, But the Conan show started, and a couple of friends of mine got hired there. My friend Tom Agna, Louis C.K., my friend Chuck Sklar, and someone got fired, and they contacted me and they said, "Hey, he's looking for a monologue writer." And at the time I was doing a lot of topical jokes. I know you like doing it too. And so I kind of typed up my act, and I sent some new ones in for that day or that week or whatever. And but I sent a bunch of jokes in, and they called me on Monday and said, "Yeah, okay, you start tomorrow." So the show was very shaky then. I said to my wife, I said, "Well, I'll go do this for 13 weeks or maybe 26 weeks and try to put a little money aside or whatever." But it's 22 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's the funny thing about entertainment and showbiz. It's this really like kind of an immediate thing. It's not like, well, let's, we'll have you fill out a resume and let's
sure
wait for the blood tests to come back. It's literally,
yeah, absolutely. And everything takes forever, and then they go, "Quick, get over here." So it's that kind of thing. Just never know.
So you got the writing job and you moved to New York.
Mm-hmm. Well, I went back and forth initially because, my wife was a VP of a company.
Ah.
And
so you married up.
I did. I definitely married up. Oh, hugely.
And you would recommend that to all comics?
Oh, yes. Really. If people say, "What's the key to your success?" It's like, it's your wife is the key to success. You just tag along for the ride, really. So I did that for a while, and then the show was very shaky. There were always rumors about it being canceled and all that stuff. But then once she ended up quitting her job, so it's like, well, what are we doing? So then we moved to New York, and we were in New York a bunch of years, and then we moved out here when Conan came out here.
And when did you move out to the West Coast?
When Conan took over the Tonight Show.
Which has been how long?
7 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you have a tough time adjusting to the West Coast? I can't imagine you would.
No, it's the funny thing was, I get here, and it was the end of March, and every day it was like 97 degrees. And I just couldn't believe that early it's that bad, But Tonight Show things went by like that. He just did it for like 7 months, and then that whole debacle happened. And that was the hard part. Where it's like, you move your family across country, and you buy a house, and all that stuff, and suddenly you're out of work. It was,
right.
That was a little stressful.
Yeah, I think it's another thing about entertainment. It's such an uncertain lifestyle, that you definitely have to be ready to.
Well, he followed David Letterman with no experience and had the show for 16 years. So I thought, well, he'll be fine, and that's, I was worried in the beginning that we were going to be canceled, and then we were fine. And then this didn't occur to us. So we thought, well, they'll give us a year or two anyway, So it didn't work out that way.
So, and as this is going on, you ended up doing multiple appearances on Leno and Letterman and Conan and all of that, all as this process is happening, right?
Well, what happened was with Conan. So I did Leno a couple times before I got the job at Conan, and then once or twice they put me out and I'd do the show again. But what would happen is at Conan, somebody would cancel, and they'd go, "Hey, can you do the show? Get out there." So I kept a suit in my office, and I had to have a set ready, and they'd say, "Hey, can you do the show tomorrow?" And I'd say, "Well, I've only got about 2/3 of the set." And they'd say, "Oh, you'll be the second guest," and I would literally be writing jokes on the train, and sometimes I would look at my old sets, and I go, "What joke is that? I never heard that joke before in my life." Like it's coming out of me, but no recollection of it or whatever.
Sure.
So I was always the emergency guy. And then what happened with Letterman was Eddie Brill called me one day and he said, "Hey, can you do the show today?" And I didn't even know I was in the running, to be honest. And I was like, "Oh, okay, sure." I'm just at my desk at Conan. And he goes, "Well, I'll play back." He called me back. He goes, "Okay, you're on. Dave is sick. Bruce Willis is going to host." Bruce Willis was he was supposed to be the first guest. Dave got shingles. So they're going to move Bruce Willis up to the host, and they need another act. So I just put my suit on and walked over there, and I thought, well, do your best stuff. And, I've been waiting for, when I was 25, I had an audition for Letterman. And the producer came up to me afterwards and told me I was very good. And then 17 years later, I got on the show.
Wow.
And then when I was on like a year later, Dave was like, "Oh, this guy's been on before, blah, blah, blah," and his introduction and so on. And after my set, he's like, "I don't remember this guy." And then he's like, "Well, you were sick, whatever." And then they would use me as their emergency guy. Somebody would cancel, then they'd call me and say, "Hey, could you do the show tomorrow?"
Wow.
So it was kind of insane.
That's great.
No one ever gave me a date.
The go-to guy.
Get over here.
That's so
I was
funny.
I was in Pawtucket, and if somebody got hurt, they'd bring me up.
Like a comedy temp.
Yeah, so true.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I like to ask, is there any, I'm sure you had tons of them, but is there any particular stand-up experience that really stands out above all of them or up there with a lot of them? Or?
Well, it's funny because you have the TV shows, which are so exciting. It's like a career thing, whatever. But then, this too, sometimes we do these benefits or whatever, and you feel like, oh, this is a nice, I would do these shows at Sloan Kettering, and I remember doing a show where it's a family of 4, and it's the mother's got cancer, and the dad's there, and the 2 kids are like in junior high, and that's the show.
Right.
And it's heartbreaking. But they laughed at everything, and you felt like it's like, oh, that was like the best show I ever had.
Right.
So I think sometimes some of those little personal connections, when you actually feel like you're doing a nice thing as opposed to just being at a bar telling jokes, I think that actually makes you feel good.
Yeah, it does give you meaning. I know there's on occasion someone will come up after a show and say they're going through something in their life, whether it's a death of a family member or an illness, and that they needed to get out, and this is just what they needed. And suddenly it gives you a little bit more dignity than being the dick joke bar dick joke guy at a bar, next to the.
Of course. And sometimes you don't even think about that because you're home quietly writing your jokes or whatever. But when you do see where it's like, oh, sometimes this actually meant something to somebody who's, they're going through something or whatever, and it actually did something for them,
And so you won an Emmy in 2007.
Yes.
That
it was kind of funny.
Must have been quite the achievement.
Well, thanks. I mean, in the old days, we would fly out every time, lose, and then go to the party, and then fly home the next day. But they changed it. They had it starting, and in those days, we didn't have to work on Mondays. We didn't have a show on, so we just fly back on Monday. But when they changed it to us doing a show 5 nights a week, it was the kind of thing of we fly out, lose, not go to the party, and then just fly back. So we'll just stay home. So I'm home watching with my family, and my 2 kids, they start fighting on the couch over nothing, as always. And we're trying to sell, and they're announcing a category, and I thought, we're going to win. This is how we're going to win. Can't quite hear. What was that? You know? And sure enough, the one time we win, you know.
And you're not there.
There's mayhem in my
Well, that's great.
But, you know, the other funny thing about that was, you know, we've been nominated a bunch of times, always lost, finally win. I don't hear from my... a month later, the Red Sox win the World Series. My dad calls me to congratulate. And it just makes me laugh. It's like, you know, I'm not on the team. You know, as happy as I was, it's like, hey, I actually was part of this other thing. You know?
That is New England.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'd like to talk about your book,
Oh, thanks.
The Astounding Misadventures of Rory Collins. And so I read 90% of the book, and I saved the last part so that I wouldn't give any spoiler alerts for anybody who watches and decides to watch. And I kind of it kind of gives me one more name to add to a list of really interesting literary characters. Ignatius J. Riley,
Sure.
Holden Caulfield, and now Rory Collins.
Oh, well, thank you. That's incredible company to be in.
So tell me why you decided to write a book and how it came about.
Well, it's funny. I was taking a class in L.A., and most of the people were writing memoir type, and a lot of them were performing to do a one-woman show or a one-man show or whatever. And I didn't want to do that. And I wrote what I thought was a short story. And it was the first chapter, and I finished this, and I went to the class, and the teacher goes, "That's not a short story. That's the first chapter of a novel." And it was like, it is? So each week I'd write a new chapter. And then the whole thing happened with The Tonight Show, and I was suddenly out of work. So I suddenly had all this free time. So it just makes me crazy to not do something. You know, I have trouble sitting still. So I just didn't want to be in my sweatpants, unshaven, watching Oprah, whatever, you know. So I said, all right, I got up every day, I showered, I shaved, had breakfast, and I just went. We have a little guest room where there's no computer, you know, there's no TV, there's no distractions. And I would just go in and write, and I'd write a chapter, and I'd come out and I'd look over what I'd written, and I'd think, what is wrong with me? You know, why did I write that? It's so much darker and dirtier than my act. I just went to these dark places. I don't know what to tell you. It wasn't intentional.
It was quite, like I said there earlier, but before the interview started, it was quite interesting to see the difference in the you know, the mind
Sure.
and how it produces, and your sets and your stand up is, you know, known to be, you know, short, quick, and clean. And
Right.
and you know, this is significantly bodier,
Absolutely.
let's say, than what you're known for.
And I was always trying to focus on TV clean and what jokes can I do on television and so on. And this was actually very liberating to just have characters, have a story, have it go to dark places, make me wonder about myself.
So I have a good question. Did you
Sure.
ever do a lot of painting? Because you have this line about somebody painting, and they obviously have a lot of time staring at a blank wall to build through thoughts. So did that come about from you painting?
No, I mean, I did have little things like that, like, but so little. I probably spent like 10 hours of my life painting or something, you know. Yeah, I don't know. It's funny how these little things come out of random places, and some things even I didn't realize until someone said, "Oh, this came from this," and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. I didn't think of that."
Right.
So,
And how long? Another question is: do you write with a computer? Or do you write longhand?
I would write longhand, and then I would transcribe it, and the transcribing would kind of be the part of the rewriting process.
Yeah.
But I would have to rewrite each chapter 3 or 4 times.
So how long did the whole book take?
Well, that time we were off, I spent like 3 or 4 hours a day on it. And that was a good 6 months or so. But overall, it probably took a year and a half. If I could have just unfortunately, my pesky job gets in the way.
So do you think you have another book in you?
I'm trying.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little bit harder because we're on television. But I try to write for about 45 minutes or so before I go to work in the morning. And but even just that little bit every day, you do make progress. It just might take me, 2.5 years instead of a year and a half. But I do really enjoy it.
Yeah, it was good for me. First of all, I thank you because I think in a lot of ways the computer has impacted on my ability to actually sit down and read books. I definitely don't read as many books as I used to, and I used to read them with great frequency, and now it just does not happen with that frequency because a lot of my reading time actually ends up getting taken on the computer, and that's in much shorter bites and much less intense concentration than reading a book. So thanks for that.
Oh, sure.
And then and we're getting close to closing time. I'd like to ask you, do you have some advice for young and up-and-coming comics on performance, and then maybe for people who are writers of any type?
Well, I think if you're interested in being a stand-up, you just have to do as many shows as possible, write as much as you can. If you're scared to go on stage, I did find acting classes actually helped me, just in terms of getting some exposure and feeling comfortable on stage and that kind of thing. I'm a big believer in that Malcolm Gladwell, putting your 10,000 hours in. I have some people who say, oh, I'm 50 years old and I've got 6 kids and I'd like to start doing stand-up. And I think, you don't have time, But there are people that's like, hey, my kids are out of the house and I'm homeless now and I'd like to go do that. Or I'm not at college and I've always do this. It's like, if you can put your 10,000 hours in, people just don't realize that you have to do it 10 years, almost every night, before you can be any.
Right.
And people always hear that and go, I don't want to hear that. But.
And how about that? Do you apply the same maxim to writing?
Absolutely. I do think writing classes are great if you can have a writing group, people that can read your stuff and have a critical eye. If I have a woman edit my stuff, and she just gets everything and says, nope, this is bad, whatever. And also, I do think one lesson I've learned from stand-up is I'm not afraid to throw stuff out. You have to write so much stuff, and such a small percentage stays in your act. Sometimes I write a chapter, and they go, no. And I go, okay, it's gone. So you don't cling to stuff that's not working,
Which is kind of tough as an artist or a performer to do. There's always that, but yeah, you're right. I just think that you just have to keep on producing.
Absolutely. There's those jokes that you love and you go, wait to hear this, and then nothing, and it never works. And I'm always amazed at the comic who has that joke that never works and says, well, I do that for me. And I think, well, do it for yourself in the car on the way over, because no one wants to hear it, apparently,
Right. People are paying for the ones that aren't for just you.
And I don't fault you for trying it, but when it's the 100th time and it's never worked, it's time to move on.
It's broken.
Broken. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. It was a real pleasure having you on the Boggis Hour, Brian Kiley. And I hope to have you on again. And I've always
Thanks, but I had so much fun. It's great to talk to you.
Big fan of your work, and looking forward to hopefully reading another book from you.
Well, thanks. And you can get my book on Amazon for $5. It's an ebook, so it's just a tall latte.
Excellent. Thanks for coming on, and we'll talk to you soon, Brian.
All right, buddy. Thanks so much.
If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the Boggis Hour, email us here at theboggushour@gmail.com.